In this lecture, we're going to talk about the different kinds of memory that are used in PC. Now, we're going to talk about that two different ways. We're going to talk about different kinds of memory as far as the chips are concerned, and then the different types of memory as far as the actual modules or physical, units that you install are concerned. Let's start with the chips. Over the years in PCs, there have been 5 different kinds of memory chips used in PCs. That would start from something called FPM memory, which stands for fast page mode. That was regular dynamic RAM, which is the standard type of memory that was used all the way up through the 486 and early Pentium era. Then, starting with the Pentium processors, a new type of memory was developed called EDO. Now, EDO is basically a modified fast page mode memory. The EDO stood for Extended Data Out. That was developed by a company called Micron Technologies, who created a way to modify the data out circuitry on a standard DRAM chip and allowed it to cycle approximately 22% faster than fast page mode. So 22% faster, and it cost about the same to make. The only trick to EDO was that it was patented by Micron Technologies. Of course, if you had a patented type of memory, what would you do, realizing that there isn't a single motherboard on the planet that would support it? Well, what they did was they contacted Intel and got with the chipset people at Intel and had Intel support the patented proprietary EDO memory in all of the Intel chipsets. Of course, that made it such that there was now a huge demand for that type of memory. All the other memory companies, lined up, licensed that technology, and then everybody was producing EDO memory. Now, normally, memory standards are controlled by an organization called JEDEC. You can actually see their website at jedec.org, and that's JEDEC. That's the Joint Electron Device Engineering Council, and they're a group, much like the other committees that control standards around PCs. It's a committee, has people from all different companies on it, and they create standards for memory. JEDEC standards are free to the members of the JEDEC committee to use. So by using JEDEC memory, a company would not have to pay royalties to a company for a proprietary type of memory. Well, anyway, that'll come back and be revisited in just a few minutes. Well, as memory evolved in the PC, after EDO came a newer type of memory called SDRAM. Now, SDRAM came on the scene around 1997 and is even still being used today. SDRAM stands for Synchronous Dynamic RAM, and it was even faster than the EDO. It was also about 20% or so faster than EDO. And the great thing about it, it was not proprietary. It was created by the JEDEC committee, so all of the members of that committee, which are basically all the memory manufacturers, could make that memory without having to pay patent fees and royalties and things like that. Well, SDRAM performed at a speed equal to that of the motherboard. Now, this is where we get into memory bandwidth. At the speed of 133 megahertz, and considering that it was interfaced at a width of 8 bytes, you have a bandwidth of 1,066 megabytes per second. This is what we call PC 133 SDRAM. That would be the bandwidth for that type of memory. Well, that memory was used for many years, even up till today, but performance has gone beyond this. Processor buses have gone beyond 1,066 megabytes per second in bandwidth. So we needed newer, faster memory. Well, JEDEC created a faster version of the SDRAM called DDR, or double data rate. And it was just that, double the data rate of this. So the DDR SDRAM ran at 266 megahertz, also times 8 bytes. And that equals 2133 megabytes per second. Now, they had to come up with a name for it, and they decided not to call it PC 266, naming it after the megahertz rating. They instead call it PC 2100, naming it more after the bandwidth than the clock speed, which is really a better way to do it, because what we're more concerned with is not megahertz, but bandwidth. Well, as the DDR was being developed, another company came on the scene called Rambus, and Rambus developed a type of memory called RDRAM. Now, this was their own patented proprietary design, not a part of the JEDEC standard. So if anybody was going to manufacture this type of memory, they would have to pay course, whatever licensing fees were required by Rambus. Now, RDRAM was fast, but it was also narrow. The initial versions that were on the scene were called PC 800, and it was so named because it ran at 800 megahertz. Now, you might think, wow, that is extremely fast, 800 megahertz, but it is only 2 bytes wide, 16 bits. It's only a 16-bit interface. So that equals 1,600 megabytes per second. And that's the bandwidth of the RDRAM. And that's kind of that, thinking more serially than parallel idea that we've talked about in the PC architecture. Well, as Intel was developing the Pentium 4, they were going to be developing that processor with a processor bus that was 3,200 megabytes per second in bandwidth. Well, none of these matched that, but they did figure out that if they took 2 of these banks of RDRAM, in other words, used it in what's called a dual channel mode, accessing twice the amount at a time, that 2 times 1,600 would equal the bandwidth. So, if we go 1,600 times 2, we get 3,200 megabytes per second. And that's called dual channel. And that is what is used on a lot of the Pentium 4 motherboards. And the reason they went with that type of memory is because it does match the processor bus. Anytime you have memory bandwidth that matches your processor bus bandwidth, that's an ideal situation. So these are the basic evolution of memory. Now we've got a few newer types that have come on the scene. The RDRAM camp has developed something new, as well as the DDR. The 2 most popular types of memory on the market today are the double data rate, SDRAM, and the RAM bus, or RDRAM. And what they've done to go beyond these speeds is this. In the case of the double data rate, we've developed a newer version called PC 2700. And what that is 333 megahertz times 8, which equals 2666 megabytes per second. So the true throughput is 2666 megabytes per second, but we call it PC 2700. And that is being used by some of the newer motherboards that support the AMD Athlon processor and even some of the newer Pentium 4 motherboards. Of course, the 2666 is not quite as fast as the 3200 dual-channel RDRAM. Well, Intel has also increased the speed of the Pentium 4 bus. They've raised it from 400 megahertz times 4, which is 3,200 megabytes per second, to 533 megahertz times 8, which is 4,200 megabytes per second. And because they've made this jump in the speed of the processor bus, it required a jump in the speed of memory as well. So the RDRAM camp has responded with a new type of RDRAM, and it's called a RIM 4200. And what that is 1,066 megahertz times 4, which equals, hold on 1 second here, which equals 4266 megabytes per second. So it's probably closer to 4,300, but they call it RIM 4200 modules, 4266 megabytes per second, and that matches the speed of the newer Pentium 4 processor bus. So currently, the 2 fastest forms of memory on the market are the PC 2700, and that's the double data rate SDRAM, or the RIM 4200, which is the 1066 megahertz RDRAM memory. Now, we've taken a look at the different types of memory. Let's look at the actual physical modules. Now, I have every kind of memory module here right now except for the new RIM 4200s. That's a new design, slightly different from what I have here. So I don't have a physical example of that, but I have something close. Let's take a look here. I've got 5 different modules underneath the camera right here. These are called SIMs, DIMMs, and RIMs. The top two are SIMs. SIMs stands for Single Inline Memory Module. The term Single Inline Memory Module comes from the fact that the pins, the contacts along the edge of these, are the same on both sides. It's a single inline row of contacts. So, for example, this top one we call a 30-pin SIM because there are 30 contacts on each side, 30 on the top and 30 on the bottom, and the 30 on each side are the same. This next one is called a 72-pin SIM because the 72 on each side are the same. It would be 144 pins, for example, if they were different, but it's not. I once had somebody call me up and ask me, how do you tell the difference between a 30-pin SIM and a 72-pin SIM? Is this a trick question? Count the pins? Geez, sometimes I don't know how to answer these questions. Actually, I think there was some confusion about counting pins because we're talking about the contacts along the edge of the device rather than the pins on the chips. And of course, between the 30-pin and the 72-pin, they're pretty much different in size, and they have different notches and physical shape. There's no way to interchange them, that's for sure. Well, from the 72-pin SIM, we went to a new kind of memory module called a DIMM. Now, SIMs only had two kinds of memory, fast page mode or EDO. There was never any SDRAM or double data rate SDRAM or RDRAM used in the SIMs. So I'm going to move those out of the picture. This is called a DIMM. It's 168 pins, even though it isn't that much longer than the 72-pin SIM, and that's because the contacts on here are different on each side. The contacts on this side are different than the contacts on this side. This is 168 pins total. Now, there's only one kind of memory that comes on these, and that would be SDRAM. That is, at least for PCs. So, if you see a DIMM and it's being used in a PC, in almost all cases that will carry the type of memory we call SDRAM. This would be, for example, PC100 or PC133. PC133 being the fastest version of the DIMM ever released, and that would have the 1066 megabytes per second bandwidth. That matches the speed of the Pentium 3 processor. So these types of modules are ideal for Pentium 3 systems. Not really ideal for Pentium 4 or for the newer AMD Athlon systems, though. After the DIMM, we have the DDR DIMM. This is the double data rate version. Notice that the notches are different. The standard DIMM has two notches. The DDR version has only a single notch. It also has more pins. This is 184 pins total. So these are not interchangeable. Your motherboard takes one or the other of these different kinds of memory, but not usually multiple types. Now, this being a DDR DIMM, it'll only have one type of memory on it, and that's DDR. Your only concern is how fast. Is it PC 2100, meaning 266 megahertz, or 2133 megabytes per second, or is it the newer PC 2700, which is 333 megahertz, 2666 megabytes per second? That's basically the question. Those are the main types of memory you'll find on these. This last module here is called the RIM. This is the RAM bus inline memory module. This also has 184 pins on it, and this is the type that would be called the PC 800. 800 megahertz times 2, 1600 megabytes per second. Now, in reality, almost all motherboards that use these would require them to be used dual channel, which means I have to put two of them in at a time. Any sockets that are not filled with these RIM modules have to be filled with continuity modules. So, for example, if a motherboard had two sets of sockets, like many of them would, I'd have two filled with the RIMs and two filled with the continuity modules. Then later on, as a memory upgrade, I could remove the continuity modules and install two more RIMs, but they would have to be installed in pairs, and the pairs have to match. They have to be the same speed and type. Well, the newer version of the RIM 4200, eliminates the need to put them in pairs. At that point, we're back to using a single module, and that single module has more pins. It has, in fact, 232 pins. They've basically filled in this area here with contacts. The nice thing about that is that you get to install them one at a time, and they also contain the faster memory up to 1066 megahertz or 4266 megabytes per second. So, in a nutshell, those are the different types of memory we have. The main competition today is between the PC 2100 and 2700, which is in the DDR DIMM. That would be this type of module here. And we have the PC 800 and the RIM 4200, which are the RDRAM RIMs, which look mostly like this here. if you're buying a new system, you might want to consider what type of memory it's going to utilize. While the RDRAM is faster, it is faster with Pentium 4-based systems because those systems are designed to use that speed. If you're purchasing or building an AMD Athlon-based system, the ideal memory for all of the Athlon systems is the DDR memory. In fact, there are no Athlon-based motherboards which accept the RDRAM. The only time it's even a question of using this RDRAM is if you're building or buying a Pentium 4-based system. And then in that case, you will have the two choices here. Now, the RDRAM is faster, but it's also a lot more expensive. So you might want to consider that for the initial purchase as well as future memory upgrades. This is going to cost you more. And remember, because of the way cache works, L1 and L2, it really lessens the impact in performance of having faster memory. So although faster memory is better, it's not as much better as you might think. So we've looked at the different types of memory, both as far as the chips are concerned, as well as the different types of modules. And this information should be of great help when you're either upgrading your system or purchasing a new system in the future.